Good evening, everyone, and welcome to CrowCast Tuesday Night Live. A couple of weeks break, so you'd think that there's tons going on at the moment, Peter, but I don't think there has been, has there?
Good morning. Oh, good afternoon.
What's going on with our audio here? Hang on a second. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, it sounds sounds good
better
to me.
We just went
Good
robot
evening.
there for a minute.
Sorry, mate. Good evening. Well, probably just as well because I had my mornings and afternoons mixed. It's sitting for 24 hours in a house. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But good evening to Fiend and also obviously to Nikki. How you going?
I'm good. What day is it again?
Oh, who knows? Who knows what day it is?
It's either coffee time or beer time, isn't it? That's really what we're
just melding into one.
It's good. My phone's got an alarm of 9 o'clock every weekday, so I know. Oh shit! I'm supposed to turn the computer on.
Look, I think I'm happy to lead off with because there has been a bit of news around, and there's a bit of a theme building in the news, Fiend and Nikki, and I'm keen to get it out there. It all started back about a week or so ago when the AFL made a decision that the players in Western Australia couldn't train in groups of 10, even though that wouldn't be in breach of the Western Australian laws on gatherings. And a little bit controversial. It was put out there that, look, we couldn't have any, Gill said we couldn't have inequity in the competition. And with the Victorian-based players only being able to train in groups of 2, that extra 8 players was thought to have made a fairly significant difference, which was I thought certainly a petty and quite typical AFL decision. And there was plenty of discussion around social media and the various talking heads about that. And it was what's been interesting in the flow from that is that there has been this palpable rising tide of the general inequities in the AFL. And it started off with Tom Rockcliffe from Port having a crack about it.
Yeah.
Then Travis Boak had a crack about it. Kane Corns had a crack about it. And interestingly, tonight, I think it was only just, I've only just recently seen it, so I think it's fairly recent. But Matthew Pavlik has come out and had a crack about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And
so there is this tide, I think. And what's been really, really interesting is the real sort of oh my God, are you serious from the Melbourne media? This sort of they're aghast that anybody would think that the competition was even and favouring Victorian teams. And Jared Waitley, came out with typical Waitley language, said he was perplexed.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can come up with a word that's got more syllables than that in it.
Jared was perplexed that we would think that it was fair that the WA teams could train in groups of 10 when the Victorian teams couldn't. So I think that it's interesting that there has now, over the last week, there has certainly been, and we all know that once we get back to a normal football season, it'll amount to naught. But it is clear that there is significant discontent, I would suspect, because I would suspect if Travis Boak's coming out and saying that, I reckon it would be pretty obvious that it would be, along the lines in most playing groups of the non-Victorian teams. And I think there's a lot of feeling out there. I really do. I think there's a lot of feeling out there in the football world. And I know just in my little Twitter world, Fiend, is that, I can tweet something and, you get a few likes here and there. If I tweet something about the inequity of the AFL competition, I can generally bank out, sort of 100.
Yeah.
It's something that has got, I reckon it's got traction, and I reckon it really has got the ear of the football public. And I think it's come to the forefront where we've got these, differing state laws. But anyway, I think it's just an interesting development through the week.
Well, the trouble with all that is that, what have I done? The trouble with all that is that there's no traction. It doesn't matter because you're just not there's not enough traction with the interstate or the non-Victorian teams to actually do anything about it. So we can arc up and carry on as much as we like, but at the end of the day, there's where's the impetus going to come from to initiate change? I mean, the AFL control GWS and Gold Coast. Port Adelaide are heavily in their pockets. So there's 3 interstate teams that are going to drop into line. There's probably a fair bit of AFL influence still at Brisbane. So there's 4. There's probably a bit of AFL influence still at Sydney. So there's 5. So there's not enough leverage from outside of Victoria, even if it's plain for everyone to see and it's completely obvious and we all know it and all the rest of it. The AFL can just turn around and thumb their noses at it. It doesn't matter. That's
which is what they do.
I was going to say, though,
yeah.
it is interesting, though, that even though we know how much in debt Port is to the AFL, you had Boak and you had Rockcliffe speaking up. And the fact that Boak was the second one to come out, if there was any issues, the club would have nixed their marking up.
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of a... I think just the manner in which the media have been engaging with players during this period where they're having to communicate from home over Skype or whatever, or, remotely. I don't think there's probably the same level of control in many clubs over their media than what there otherwise would be. And I think that's why you get players probably speaking their mind a little bit more because they haven't been schooled.
Yeah, that's a good point. And look, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, as I said, once we go back to normal, everything will just go back to normal.
Yeah.
But I did think it was interesting that's what the flavour has been in terms of AFL discussion this week. There has been an interesting uptake, and I just wonder. And actually, I should mention too. I think Mick Malthouse might have weighed in.
Yeah, Malthouse has weighed in. Lee Matthews has said before that he's no longer. Since he was up at Brisbane, he has a completely different perspective. The trouble is that Lee Matthews is probably not taken as seriously as he was maybe 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think though that look, I guess 95% of me, says that you're absolutely spot on, and it will just amount to naught. I guess there is just that little 5% which thinks, well, people keep talking about this, and if serious heavyweights like Pav, if they're starting to, if they start to become outspoken on it, then who knows? But I guess you got to look at, well, how can you, given the fact that the whole issue with the MCG and the tenants and the contract, and how does that change? The only thing that I have ever been able to see that could help and make things a bit better is just even getting 4 or 5 games a year on the MCG.
Yeah.
So that we at least play on it. And the problem is, of course, is that whenever the tenants Hawthorn and Melbourne want to sell home games, it's always the interstate clubs that bear the responsibility of losing that opportunity of playing on the G and end up going to Darwin or Tasmania.
Yeah.
That to me is the thing that's changeable, and that really something should be done about that.
Look,
the other interesting thing was that they talked about that if they are, once they go back in, with Western Australia's restrictions, they're saying that, well, Freo and West Coast have to relocate. So, well, I can understand why there's been a bit of arcing up if they're doing that, because I suggest we might still have those similar restrictions here in South Australia. Are they going to tell
I was
the
wondering
Crows
about
they
that.
have to move as well?
I was wondering about that. They're all going on about Western Australia's closed borders, but our borders are still closed too, aren't they?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I suggest that even if our restrictions do get eased, I think our borders will be very strongly policed still.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, I would have thought.
Quite rightly.
Look, I still don't think there's a problem with, if they're going to use chartered flights, I don't see that there's a problem per se in just fly in, fly out situation. I can't see why Western Australian clubs would have to base themselves, say, in Adelaide or Northern Territory or anything like that, really, because if you're gonna impose those restrictions on those two clubs, why doesn't the same apply to any other club?
Exactly. And also, yeah, I'll be interested to hear the announcements on Monday about the restart of training, because returning South Australian and West Australian based clubs, returning players that have been situated in Melbourne or wherever, they're having to they can't start training for 14 days because they're in self-isolation.
Yep.
Whereas a South Australian player going and playing for a Victorian club, well, they can start training straight away. Not fair.
No,
Do you think the AFL make them wait 14 days? I bet not.
No. Look, the whole thing still, I think there's still a bit of speculation going on. I think McLaughlin is clearly waiting to see what's happening with the borders. I mean, Victoria have still got their problems. And as an interstate club, I don't know whether I'd be necessarily happy flying into Victoria at the moment with their
Absolutely not.
unreported outbreak.
And the other thing that people forget about all of this discussion is we're talking about players, etc. But you can't have a game without umpires. And the majority of the umpires are based in Victoria. And so what's actually going to happen around them being involved? And also, they're not like players. They're not professional. They have their own jobs. So how is that actually going to be impacted?
Yeah, exactly.
I think Queensland have given them the green light to fly in, fly out. It'll be a case of whether the South Australian and West Australian governments give them the fly in, fly out green light. But I wouldn't. I mean, if I'm Stephen Marshall, I'm not thrilled with any Victorian team coming over to South Australia at the moment.
And Professor Spurrier will be even less thrilled.
I mean, there's
She's the one calling the shots.
That's right, and Feen, you're right. I mean, there's one issue. Do you want your team going over and being in Victoria? Well, that's one issue. And the other issue is, do you want a Victorian team coming over here?
Yeah, exactly.
With no 14 days self-isolation.
Exactly. We've had such a tight control over our borders and about our situation, and with outstanding results. I don't think the government would be too pleased in any group of players coming in from Victoria right now. I can't see it, and I can't. Given that outbreak went unreported for what, a week or so, Pete, was it?
Oh, it's a month.
Yeah,
it's almost a month.
So you've got all the people that all the contact tracing that's got to occur with every staff person in that factory and all their contacts. I don't think it's going to be as bad as the cruise, but I think it's going to be bad enough that it's going to set Victoria back further than every other state, including New South Wales.
Yep.
So what do the VFL do then? Do they, disclude Victoria from in terms of providing venues? And do we run it out of two different states? Do we run it out of New South Wales and South Australia?
Can we use the NT?
Well, we could use the NT.
That's
the thing. Is you could have Adelaide Oval, you could have Optus Stadium, you could have TIO up in Darwin as a possibility. That you've got those three that are going on. There's Traeger Park in Alice Springs if the weather is suitable, and there are actually options depending on what actually happens in this state regarding the SANFL. If you're playing these games without crowds, then do you actually utilise some of the local SANFL grounds that are up to scratch?
Well, the NT government were even quoted as saying that if the AFL brought games to Darwin, that they would allow crowds. So that was the carrot that the NT government were offering.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be one very significant hurdle to all of that, and that will be Marty Dangerfield. She says no. If Marty says no, it's not it won't happen.
Yeah, well, unless all the games are played down at Cardinia Park, she's not going to be happy.
Marty will say no.
That's very cynical.
So we need to think.
Peter.
We need to think about something else. Another potential.
Play down at Moggs. Look, it's all. Everything that we're talking about highlights what you opened with, Peter, and that is the Vic-centric nature of the competition. I mean, South Australia was poo-pooed for a hub because apparently we didn't have enough grounds up to scratch. Well, don't we play pre-season games on Richmond and Noarlunga, and haven't we got an oval the size of Footy Park up at Centrals, and don't we still have Footy Park, by the way? Isn't Footy Park still intact?
We do. Yeah, we do.
It is indeed. We also have, the problem is a lot of what the requirements are actually the size of the change rooms. So West Adelaide had to have bigger change rooms and fix them. We know that Unley's change rooms are I think they're still too small for an AFL game. They're okay for AFLW.
That ground's too small, really.
Yeah, it is. And you've got to avoid the dog poo. But Richmond Oval is up to scratch.
Yep.
I reckon Central's probably would be as well.
Yeah. So you got,
because they're decent rooms under there as well.
You've got 4 venues right there. You've got Noarlunga, you've got Richmond, you've got Adelaide Oval, and you've got Centrals. And I'm not sure what work has been done at Footy Park, but we still train there, so you would expect that it's in good condition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's five grounds in South Australia. Now look, we're a central state. We're central to Western Australia and Victoria and New South Wales. We're COVID free for 14 days or whatever it is. Closed borders and all the rest of it. What it should be, it shouldn't even be a conversation. We are the obvious choice between us and Northern Territory. And we could very easily have divide the teams and have 2 hubs, and just utilise Footy Park, Adelaide Oval, Traeger, and the one up in Darwin.
Yeah,
and we could run a competition. It shouldn't even be a conversation.
No.
And if we're a truly national competition, it wouldn't be a conversation, would it?
No. Perth have got Optus, and I imagine they've still got CB.
Yep.
Because AFLW games played there, it's still really nice oval.
Yeah.
Oh no, the local the Fremantle Oval, not Subi. They play the other one for the AFLW games just down there at Fremantle, and that's a really nice oval as well.
So you got probably 3 AFL quality ovals in Perth.
Yep.
So that you're right. I mean, there's actually no in a pandemic. And if you look at what's happening right at this moment, there is no possible argument or rational thought process that could fuel games in Victoria.
No, there's not.
Just couldn't.
There's not. It's a high density, it's a densely populated state. They've got the least amount of testing out of any state in Australia. They've got a recent outbreak that's at this stage uncontrolled. There's no. I wouldn't personally. Would you go there, Peter? I wouldn't go to Victoria at the moment.
Oh, no way.
No.
Yeah, the problem you've got is that last year you've got a team like Richmond who in 22 rounds of football had 17 of those 22 rounds in Melbourne, and so they're just not prepared. And because as I understand it, it was a number of the senior Richmond players that arced up about the hubs, as well as Geelong. They just have no sense of it being a national competition, and they spend a significant percentage of their season just in their own bed in Melbourne, and that's what they like.
Yeah.
And the AFL panders to that.
Yep.
But it also does come back to that point I made about those officials, the umpires. So if we do go ahead and say, look, basing it in South Australia and TWA, actually creating a hub out of those 3, move everybody over here, it means you're actually asking those umpires to move interstate, can they still do their regular workday jobs, even if it's working from home, but can they actually do that from interstate?
Well,
Because the AFL is not going to pay their salaries.
don't we have? No, they'll be on Job Seeker. Don't we have
Anybody got that yet?
umpires? Don't we have umpires in South Australia? Wouldn't you love to see an AFL match coached by SANFL umpires? Because I don't know about you,
Oh my
but
God, yes.
I much prefer the SANFL style of umpiring to the AFL umpiring.
Yes. And unfortunately, a lot of our SA guys, they're told you have to move to Victoria if you want to get AFL games.
Yeah, which is ridiculous. So it's still
Which
a bit.
is why certain South Australian guys didn't get anywhere because they refused to do that.
Yeah, it's still a bit to play out, and I think that's why McLaughlin is holding fire, whereas the NRL have gone full at a gate, obviously because they're broke. But I think we'll see some movement, within the next fortnight, because they want to get 17 games in and a final series, and they want to try to avoid encroaching on the cricket season as much as possible, which means they really can't squeeze into November. So, if you want 17 games of 17 rounds of footy, you're gonna have to get your act together. Particularly, we've got to fit in a pre-season. Make preparations. The broadcaster's got to make preparations. There's a lot of logistical work to be done. Clubs themselves have got to reassemble in terms of their support staff. A lot of logistics to go down in a fairly short space of time, and I think that the sentiment that you get from the players too is that they don't want a Mickey Mouse competition. They want something that if whoever wins the flag this year, they can legitimately say we won a legitimate AFL premiership. Do you think that's even possible? Do you think, like with all that's going on, do you think the winner of this season is going to be held in the same esteem?
I think, interestingly, and I'll just sidetrack just a second before I take up that point. Thing. It was interesting because there's been discussion around Melbourne now about, well, if push comes to shove and we can actually get a grand final, for example, in October, for example, in Adelaide, do we move? But we can't have a crowd in Melbourne. Do we move the grand final just for 1 year and have it in Adelaide or Perth? And I think the overwhelming sentiment is that you'd much prefer to have a grand final with a crowd.
Oh God, yeah.
And I don't think that there would be any opposition. The Melbourne media mafia, who are so wedded to the MCG, were generally pushing that. But I suspect that being the case, that whoever wins the grand final, unless there'll be two narratives. Fine. And that is that if this season goes ahead and there's a grand final in Adelaide and Richmond win that grand final, it'll be one of the great premierships of all time.
Yeah.
Because they've had to
travel.
They've had to go. They've won it away.
They had to get on their bikes.
It's been harsh. There's been all of these things that have happened, and that should forever close the argument about it being too hard to win on the road in a grand final.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
And they'll be one of the great teams of all time.
Yeah.
The second narrative would be if a non-Victorian team wins it.
If Adelaide beat Richmond.
If Adelaide beat Richmond, then it would forever have it. It would forever have an asterisk.
Yeah, that's right.
It would forever have an asterisk because you didn't win the grand. You didn't go to the home of football, and you didn't win it at the home of football, and so it will ever have forever. And I think that would go for any non-Victorian team. They didn't make the journey to the MCG, and so it's not it will never be. A great victory. They're the two narratives.
But I also do think that apart from the fans of the winning team, they'll think there's no asterisk next to it. I think for the rest of us, there will be an asterisk no matter how long this season goes. Like Sloan said, he's happy to play until November if they need to get games in, etc. But I think we all know that there's already an asterisk next to this because we've had round 1, and there's going to be how many months before round 2 is played? And with a shorter season, that round 1 is crucial. But it's how long ago, and you've got different size teams that are then going to compete for the rest of the season. You've got different coaching panel because you've got different people have left and
good
all that
points,
kind of stuff.
Nikki. Good points.
Yeah, the alternative, of course, is just to scrap the season altogether and have a Australian carnival with all the state league teams in it as well, and just make it a standalone football carnival until the end of footy season. Because
we'd have 2 teams.
Well, look, I just struggle to see the legitimacy, and if the AFL Grand Final winner this year is not going to be held in the same esteem as any other year, then to my mind, why do it? Why play? If those players are going to risk injury in order to win a Mickey Mouse premiership that's not going to be held in any regard whatsoever, why bother? Why not do something as a standalone, whether it be a State of Origin carnival or an Australasian Cup carnival or something like that? Why not do something as a one-off and just write the season off?
Yeah, I'm for you on that. I have to be honest. I don't think I've ever quite felt as disillusioned with the AFL and AFL football as I have this season. With all this happening and the way that they've handled it, the way the players have been, and I think the whole thing's just been really, really messy. I think it's been, I think the players haven't come out of it looking very good, and neither of the AFL, and the media are horrendous as always. And honestly, I would be quite happy if they just drew a line underneath it and let's just, do whatever gets it back on TV and entertains people for, they can get a bit of money in the bank or whatever.
Yeah.
And then just come back again next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be like what they've done with the supercars using that E-Series to keep fan engagement, etc. It's a bit of fun. The drivers in that are pretty damn serious about it now, but they recognise that it's just a way to keep their sponsors happy, etc. So the AFL needs to actually really take a look at what supercars are doing and the way they're keeping that engagement going with the restrictions that are on. They need to come up with something that provides that kind of short, sharp and shiny entertainment.
Well, the thing is with what the supercars have done is they've never tried to make it out to be anything other than it is. And the other thing that they've done is thrown a hell of a lot of production at it. So you sit down and you watch the Supercars E-Series. You've got expert panel, you've got good coverage, you've got fantastic angles, you've got it's not glitchy or anything like that, and it's enjoyable to watch. But it's not held up to be anything other than a stand-in. And I think, most competitions in most sports are going to struggle with the legitimacy of this year. And I think it's widely acknowledged by the public, at least, that the only reason you get a season off is to, satisfy your sponsors. But in that event, that's what makes me say, why bother trying to make it something that it's not? If it's not a legitimate AFL season, then don't try and put on a legitimate AFL season. Do something different that will engage people in a different way. That is, got its own. It stands on its own merit without trying to be something that it's not.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think whatever the thing that, and I think this plays into why I feel so disillusioned with the AFL at the moment, is that the problem I can't see them overcoming is that I think that you've just got this constant battle, between this, to try and get things with any kind of parity when you've got different states with different laws and you're trying to run a national competition, and there's always going to be hurdles. and there's always going to be inequities, I think.
It's
Even more
exposed
so.
people, hasn't it, Pete? I think in adversity, when people are thrown into situations that they're not comfortable with or not routine or usual, you often get an insight into their real thoughts. And I think what we've seen, as you rightly point out, from the Victorian media in particular, and also the manner in which the AFL have conducted themselves and the bulk of the players, we've really seen true colours in many respects of what people really think, how they really see things. And it's as plain as the nose on your face. This is we are playing in the VFL. You know, and we must, for those people that are not old enough to remember, we can never forget that in 1990 we applied to join the VFL. That's what we did. When West Coast joined in the mid-80s, they joined the VFL.
VFL, exactly.
The VFL is still the VFL. It only changed its name. It conducted a soft revolution of Australian football and took over football codes in many other states in not a dissimilar way that China tried to buy off small countries by, throwing money at them. It was basically do it our way or don't, or you're not involved, and smaller competitions had no choice. But make no mistake, we're playing in the VFL, and we should never forget that. We should never forget that we're playing in the VFL. We still have a Brownlow medal, which is a VFL medal. We still play for the same trophy that they played for in VFL days. There are so many things that continue. When you talk about stats and you talk about histories, the history of the AFL doesn't start from 1990. It starts from, 18 whatever, or if you're Port Adelaide, 1546. We can't forget, and I think what you're saying is absolutely correct, Pete, that this situation has brought about a real sense of disillusionment and probably a little bit of surprise from people that may not really pay that close an attention to it in states outside of Victoria, to just how Vic-centric this competition is.
Yeah.
I mean, we did actually get away from the VFL. It did actually start to become the AFL when Wayne Jackson was in charge. But that's why they got rid of him, because the Vic clubs didn't like the fact that he was doing equalisation. He was not letting them rule the roost, and the commission, which is heavily Vic-centric, did not like it, and they got rid of him.
Well, I think, to be honest with you, Nikki, I'd even go back and say that Ross Oakley was very, very much a G for a truly national competition. If you read some of the stuff, I mean, he had a lot of people in his ear, and he was a bit of a, he was the first cab off the rank sort of thing. But Oakley wanted a national comp, and it's only since Demetrio that things have really gone downhill. And the thing that always shocks me is that Wayne Jackson actually supposedly endorsed Demetrio as his successor, and I couldn't think of two people who are more poles apart, both in terms of character and also in terms of their vision, than Wayne Jackson and Andrew Demetrio.
I think Andrew was hiding a lot of his own personal beliefs in order to get that position. One of them is very much a political animal and came up through politics, and the other one was involved in business. And there's two very different ways of working. So
anyway, with all that aside, as I mentioned at the beginning, for all that discontent, I don't see where anything will ever change. And I think it brings us back to what you were saying earlier, Peter, that it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. As a supporter of a non-Victorian club, it really just takes the edge off. And I think for a lot of people, that's been a sentiment that has probably simmered under the surface for quite some time. Particularly older people who were brought up in footy in the 70s and the 80s, and AFL football just never felt quite the same. This has now highlighted that, or magnified it, I guess you'd say. And I myself find it I haven't really missed the footy as much as I thought I would, apart from something to watch on a Saturday afternoon or whenever it is.
Yeah, absolutely spot on.
Yeah, we've actually discovered there's other things to do.
But it's not only that, Nick. You know, I mean, maybe it's age, I don't know, but there would be no way in the 80s that I would miss a game of football. No, just no way I would miss a game of footy. Whereas I honestly have not missed the footy. And we're running a podcast covering one of the AFL clubs. In many respects, we've lived, eaten and breathed the Adelaide Football Club now for 5 odd years, and yet I've got to say that it hasn't left the hole that I expected that it would have left. And I wonder how many other non-Victorian people would say the same thing. I've seen a lot of it on Twitter.
Yeah, as have I.
You know, I mean, it'd be interesting to see in chat how many people, and probably not the chat people, because they're the people that are obsessed enough to actually listen to us whenever we're. But we might chuck it out on Twitter later or something, you know, because I'm just interested to see how many people have not missed the footy as much as they thought they would. Anyway, the other thing that is going on at the moment is Marty Matner, Peter, reportedly took a severance package, in light of the fact that he was told that he wouldn't be reappointed, his contract wouldn't be renewed at the end of the year. So he's taken a severance and obviously weighing his options. What did you make of all of that?
I thought it was a fairly curious decision, to be honest. And I was pretty disappointed, I have to say. Not that I'm on the inner walls of the coaching department, but he just seemed to me to be a very, very well credentialed and. From as much as I could make out, I think that a lot of our problems weren't necessarily sitting in. Our forward line has just really become a disaster in the last 2 or 3 years, and so I'm just not sure how Ben Hart escapes that kind of scrutiny. I'm particularly disappointed that his role is covered by Brent Riley. And I just, I don't know. It left me a little bit cold, to be honest.
Which is kind of interesting because Riley's normally the midfield coach in the SNFL team. And so that's our 2 defensive coaches that we've lost. Paul Thomas, who I rate really highly, he's gone, and Matner, who we know that he's got a really good background. So what's going on with their defense?
Well, I think the line coaching is interchangeable, to be honest with you, because all of these coaches have, except for Ben Hart, have coached teams in their own right. So I think, Marty Matner could be a forward coach, he could be a midfield coach, he could be a defensive coach. I don't think it really matters. I think they put them where they want to put them. But the thing that I've got a problem with is we're already probably the most inexperienced coaching box in the league. And now we've lost probably the most credentialed assistant coach on our panel. 200 odd AFL games, multiple premierships at Sturt, premiership player at Sydney. As well credentialed far better credentialed than even the head coach, who's only been an assistant at GWS and Port. So, it's, to me, it can't be anything other than a financial decision. And it just probably tells me that Paul Thomas and Marty Matner were paid much more than Benny Hart.
Mm.
I mean, you compare compare
yeah.
the coaching box at Port Adelaide to ours. You've got Kenny Hinkley, you've got Brent Montgomery, you've got Michael Voss, you've got Nathan Bassett. Who else is there? There's Jared Schofield, who's been touted as a future AFL coach. I mean, you look at that coaching box and that level of experience compared to what we've got, and it makes you really think, you know, what we've got just isn't up to scratch. How can we get a positive answer? How can we get a positive result out of that?
No, and I'm just, you know, for me, an assistant coaching panel that ends up with both Ben Hart and Brent Riley on that as two of the three line coaches. I don't know. Doesn't look to me as though, you know, doesn't seem to be a lot of diversity there.
No, there's not at all.
So anyway,
look, and maybe it's just a matter of that they've accepted the fact that we're going to be shit for a couple of years, Pete, and they're trying to minimise their expenditure.
And that I think you're pretty much spot on, Finn, that most of it is to do with money. And I mean, I'm one of the few people that was actually looking forward to seeing us play this year, but that was in the hope that we were going to play a lot of the younger players, and I was willing to take the losses, but it seems we're going to have a very young coaching group as well as the younger players. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, it's going to be interesting for a lot of reasons. I mean, the soft cap is going to have an impact on staffing. So, you know, there will be a lot of very well-credentialed assistant coaches looking for work, which is obviously going to filter down to the state leagues. But, you know, I said a few weeks ago that it's going to be a return to 90s football. And you recall, you know, when we won our two flags, there was, you know, Blighty, Reid and one or two others in the box, and that was it, sort of thing. You know, so we're going to see that again in the coaches box. We're not going to have the cast of thousands. We're probably not going to have the stats man. We're not going to have the dedicated doctor on payroll, etc., etc. So it will be interesting to see if that persists after this year, or whether slowly those caps are lifted again, and we see football clubs, you know, return to employing a cast of thousands to keep their precious babies on the park.
Very much interesting times.
Well, you know, as someone pointed out in the chat earlier, the AFL have lost their major sponsor. Virgin was one of the major sponsors, and there's no money coming from Virgin anymore. You would imagine.
Another big one's NAB that's taken a hit as well.
Yeah, the money is not going to be there. The only I know we get the most of our money from the broadcaster, but the peripheral money the clubs get from sponsorships it's going to dry up, because these, you know, how many clubs are sponsored by airlines in the competition? We've got a South China airline sponsorship. I'm sure there's a few more that have airline sponsorships. You know, there's some retail sponsorships there that are obviously going to struggle. Look, the money's not going to be there, and I think we are not really going to see the extent of the impact on the financials or the economic situation on the AFL for probably another 6 to 12 months, when it becomes apparent that there just isn't enough money to go around.
I think probably in the end for really what is essentially a domestic league, it's probably a reasonable correction in some ways.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
You think of, you know, some of the money that was particularly for the players that have just kept pushing the envelope. So
yeah, they really have to take a long, hard look at themselves.
Yep.
And the fact that they've been pushing to try to protect themselves, it's like, well, are you actually protecting those trainers? How many of them have lost their jobs that that the players rely on so much?
They don't give a shit, Nikki. They do not give
not when it comes down to the end of it.
toss. They care about nothing or nobody but themselves.
But we can
That's
take it
become
back
very
to
clear.
when we actually started this podcast, which was about literally the Essendon saga. And we knew the AFLPA back then didn't actually really care about most of the players because they were on the side of those drug cheats. And they were not protecting the clean players, they were protecting the drug cheats. And so I have had no respect for the AFLPA since then.
No. Yeah, and you know what? It's a different scale. It's a far different scale, except that. Yes. But, you know, that young lad, the star draft pick in the NBA, Ion, he was a rookie, played his first games this season. Now, of course, it's different, but the intent was there, and that's when they all locked down. He was the first one to come out and say, we're paying the wages, the staff around his stadium.
Yeah.
Now, you don't expect AFL to do that. No intent at all.
Your
to
audio
move
is
their
just...
position.
Sorry,
no
your
intent
audio,
to move.
Yeah, that's better.
And you know what? To my knowledge, the only person that's made any kind of movement has been Chris Scott, who said that he would keep coaching for nothing, and he's not taking any pay at the moment. The players, they've not been prepared to move 1 inch.
No, and look, the writing was on the wall with regards to the players' attitudes towards their ancillary staff and their support staff when it became a big deal that blokes like Trent Cotchin and Rory Sloane would clean up the change rooms afterwards. You know, after like that should be a given. Like,
yep.
If you go somewhere and you have a drink, Pete, do you chuck the glass on the floor?
No.
I mean, that should be a given. The fact that it was such a big deal that these blokes, we value our support staff. We're going to clean up all the elastoplast and all the drink bottles and that. Well, so you fucking should. I don't know why that's a bloody something to hang your hat on. You know, that's not something to win a Nobel Prize over. And that, in hindsight, in retrospect, you look at things like that and you think, you know, they are a bit precious. And as it turns out, in the context of what's going on now, and as you rightly point out, their unwillingness to bend and to look after other people in their organisation, I'm with you. I just think it's extremely poor behaviour. And you know, Nikki, you were talking about the AFLPA losing your respect after the Essendon saga. Well, to me, the AFLPA really changed when Paul Evans came on board. They became just an arm of the AFL, in my opinion. And his rhetoric and some of the stuff that he's come out with has been borderline laughable.
Yeah, the fact that they pretty much are an AFL entity, and yet they seem to have the AFL by the balls. It's just bewildering to me.
And then they make bloody Dangerfield the president.
Yeah.
I know.
We all know where that decision's making is coming from.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and interestingly, a previous president, Matthew Pavlik, has probably aired more than one view that is counter to the current president's view. So maybe that shows you, that's illustrative of the shift in mindset as well. So
Yep.
Anyway.
Lots to play out, Pete and Nick.
I reckon. Lots.
I think
we'll still be here.
We'll still be here. We'd probably make the announcement now, Pete. What do you reckon? While no one's listening.
Yeah. No, go.
So
do it.
A bit of a rethink of the CrowCast for the rest of this year and going forward into the future. It's been a labour of love to put 2 and often 3 podcasts together a week, and video casting and all the rest of it that we've tried to do and make the most of the resources that are available online, etc. But the time has come to pull the pin on Tuesday Night Live we will continue Tuesday Night Live fortnightly until the season commences, and then Tuesday Night Live will have its final show. Also, the Rev Up will not continue this year or in the future. The time and effort and production and all the rest of it is just too hard. So CrowCast will be reverting to the Sunday night show from the start of the season and into the future. It'll be a slightly expanded show. It might go a little bit longer than the current hour that it's Nikki, that it's supposed to go. The hour, Nikki.
No. Talk to Macca, not me. Macca.
And we will have, along with myself, we will have a rotation of Peter, Nikki, Macca, and Donkey on the Sunday night show, where we'll do our usual analysis and probably spend a little bit of time talking about other stuff. But, it's been a difficult decision because Tuesday Night Live is where it all started, Peter, when we started doing pre-recorded shows back in 2015.
It did.
And, oh my God, yes.
2015, when we were doing pre-recorded shows, and it took me 3 days to bloody edit them and all the rest of it.
So basically, from myself and I know Pete and the rest of us, Fane, thank you so much for all the work you have done. It's you talk about the labour of love. It's pretty much on you. We just turn up, sprout shit, ramble on, cause you headaches. You have to wrangle the flights between Macca and I on Sundays. You have done an outstanding job, and we love being a part of it.
It's just so much.
It's kind of sad.
Much fun. And look,
it is.
To be honest with you, a lot of it is my own life. I've got a young grandson now, and I'm doing some study, and I've got a busy job, and at some point you've just got to say, how much time am I putting into this? And I think we've pushed the envelope pretty far in terms of what we produce. I don't think there's any other podcast that goes live. I don't think there's any other podcast that multicast to various platforms and all the rest of it. And that's nothing against other casts or whatever, or putting us up on a pedestal, but I think we've tried to do quite a lot of stuff, and we've tried to do it to give people a bit of a different angle and a different bit of content compared to all the 2-second bullshit that we get on mainstream media, and we'll continue to do that on Sunday nights. But there's only so many hours in the day, and so it was a difficult decision. So just for myself personally, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been involved with the cast, and that includes Scorpus, who picked up the preview cast on Thursday night and ran with it, and made it his own, and it was an excellent show that we really couldn't replicate with the Rev Up. Thank you to everyone who's been involved in the cast, Peter especially, and Nikki, as well as founding members of the cast. Thanks both to you guys for all your support. And it doesn't mean we're going away, it just means that we're not going to be on during the week. So it'll be a Sunday night cast, it'll be analysis of the game gone, a little bit of AFL and Crows chat, a little bit of banter, but probably just focused on the game that's just gone. And I'm sure that other podcasts like Two Crows and Crowject and Crow's Nest, and what happened to Sensible Crow, by the way? He's disappeared. But there's lots of really good casts for people to listen to during the week for their general AFL news and Adelaide Crows news and banter. And we're going to stick to our Sunday night slot with our analysis. So thanks everyone, and thanks finally to everyone who has supported us through the Spreaker chat, which has built its own little community, and now on Discord. I mean, it's just, I don't know about you guys, Pete and Nikki, but it's amazed me how many people engage with us each Tuesday night.
It's great, and it's all been great fun, and also always continues to amaze me the people from far-flung places around the world that we get messages from. So always good to get those messages as well.
Yeah,
and I think that's what's actually made us. That's our point of difference, is, as you said, being live. But it means we've got that interaction with them because they keep us on our toes. We'll say something and it's wrong, and they correct us, or they're just downright funny bastards. that just make me giggle
Well,
a lot of the time.
I'll never forget after 2015 when we were doing pre-recorded, and I said to you guys, I reckon we can do this live, and you were like, no, we can't do it live. But I think you're right, Nick. I think it has been, it's been so much more fun because it's essentially we've had an audience as we've been casting. The people on chat have been hilarious. They pull us up when we're wrong. They give us information when we need it. They keep things going. I just love it. I just love watching the chat, and I'm glad that we've been able to migrate people from other platforms as well. So, look, enough about that, but just a big thank you to everyone. It's been a fantastic 5 years for Tuesday Night Live and for CrowCast in general. I would never have thought that we'd grown to the extent that we have, and I hope that people really get behind the Sunday show when it kicks off, which will be after round 1 or 2 or whatever they call it. But until then, obviously, we'll continue with Tuesday Night Live fortnightly until that kicks off. But I thought we may as well make the announcement now, Pete, so people can adjust their sleeping patterns.
That's right.
And the best thing is, you won't have to. Will you still have a pumpkin on Sunday nights, or will things be a little bit more relaxed?
I might be a bit more relaxed on a Sunday, actually.
There you go. All right. Is there anything else that we need to cover before we bugger off? I think that might be about it.
No, because I've still got the pumpkin.
All right. Well, thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Peter. Thanks to everyone on the chat.
See you guys.
And we'll see you in a fortnight's time for another Tuesday Night Live.
Night all.
Good night.